I hope it was a good season. I no longer have to
It really
travel.
was. I had a great Christmas with my son, and all
Oh,
is really
great.
well, and people close to me are fine.
Well, divine. Excellent, excellent. I doing very well, and I would be curious, friends, what anyone is thinking about on this fine evening. I know Michael has been reading Light in August by Faulkner. I'm always down to talk about Faulkner. I have been thinking, and actually, I think it's divine because I've been thinking more and more on this question that Mr. Jockin has raised, which I think is very important because on this idea that we don't control memory, which I agree with. Memory doesn't seem to be something we control. But there also seems to be a certain cultivation to memory. That seems to be fair to say. But what does it mean to cultivate memory where at the same time it's something that seems to come upon us? And there's Clayton. Clayton, your paper on stewardship is tremendous. I really have to give you credit. I look forward to talking. Clayton has written a tremendous article that I really enjoyed. I think the framework of stewardship to think about, who are you? You're a steward of the body, that it's a symbiotic relationship. I think is just brilliant. And I will be incorporating that into belonging again. So thank you for coming today, Clayton. It's beautiful. But I'll throw it out there. Anyone wants to speak about anything, I'll throw it to you, Jockin.
Actually, I appreciate you bringing up my little pet topic, because I've been working more and more in memory, and the more I work with it, the more I get convinced of my position about it. I say it on this point. I think memory and the revelational power of memory reveals for me. I've been thinking about my car ride today, coming back from visiting my best friend and his family. Is proof that we don't own our intelligence. It's not ours. This autonomous rationality argument gets obliterated by this point of memory. And I could flesh out the arguments about it, but the basic thrust point is that I think, because one of the theological arguments for God is intelligibility. Intelligibility is what proves God. And especially even on the Greek Aristotelian argument of nous, in our operation with nous, it's not we participate passively with nous. We are not the active nous. That's God on the Aristotelian account. And that strike through of intelligence, how it works and even gets going, and the very fact that humans are not computers because of our relationship to memory is not like random access memory, like computers operate. It's an embodied, as you're kind of hinting at, and that's why I say this theological thrust about it, because we can be conditioned to have better memory. In fact, one of the arguments of basically religion is to remember God. What? No, could that not be one of the arguments about it? The reason why we get conditioned to have better memory is because we get a deeper relationship with God when we have memory. So I don't know. That's a hot take. You guys can certainly push back on this, on what I'm saying here. But I had a long car ride and I was listening to the recent net sessions about this. And I just don't think, I'm just not convinced by this kind of materialist secular stance that intelligence is something controlled by us. And while even though I don't disagree that there are certain material conditionalities about it, but that's no different than any other Aristotelian stance of energeia and dumasis, meaning you can have a capacity to do something, but it could be hindered by external materiality that can hinder you. What I mean by this, meaning like thinking intelligence, IQ power, which has a material aspect. Like nutrition is a huge aspect. Nutrition and early childhood developments, environmental dynamics, like lead in your water, for example, will affect IQ. I'm not denying these facts, but I can certainly accept those points and nevertheless still hold this stance that this intelligence is not yours to keep. It was never yours in the beginning. And I think memory, for me, is one of those heuristics to point that out. I say this also because I've been asked to teach a course now on De Anima this coming year, which, I reread it again recently, this last week. And I think a line from there that caught again my attention is the nature of the soul and what is soul. And this nature of man as its principle of the desirable appetite, right? The desirable nous, proiesis, choice, and nous desiring. I find this kind of triune relationship, what is the principle of man, and the nature of memory is a very important aspect of it, because we have to not be caught up into the day-to-day kind of smooth flow that digital apparatuses want you to keep for you. They kind of, if you notice, by offloading memory, by using computers and other operations to allow you to not have to hold memory, actually helps you kind of lose something about you when you do that. And it's a complicated dynamic because there's obviously certain aspects that are very useful about it. So I'm just now I'm bouncing around a little bit on this point. I will close on the last note, which is while I was with my best friend and his family, we were watching, actually, I don't know if anyone saw it, the Amazing Digital Circus. It's kind of an interesting show. If anyone hasn't watched it, I'll summarize. It's on Netflix. It's a animated cartoon. And the thrust point is that all the persons were plugged into a VR set in a virtual reality, but got trapped in it. They can't get out. And there are all these characters, and it's basically stuck in this repeated simulacrum by AI of playing games. But what keeps getting shown is that there's two aspects of it. It's like there's the care that characters have with each other, right? There's that aspect of it. But the other aspect is I kept seeing over and over again was memory, recalling people that aren't there anymore. Because apparently his characters the version of dying in this story is getting called abstracted. I think that's quite interesting, that to die as a human is to be abstracted in this digital space. It's very interesting. But characters remember those who die, get abstracted. And there's actually one character that's very ironic, very much like, it's very avant-garde in that sense. It's very interesting from he's aware he's in a game and we're just pretending this isn't real, haha. But nevertheless, he still had a relationship with one of the other characters that got abstracted. And one of the other characters brought it up very quickly, like actually as an insult. And it really hurt this character named Jax, who lost you can tell what's happening here is that there was a relationship that this memory is calling out and remembered. And it's actually very human. So even the most ironic, completely distant, I wanted to subvert everything in operation here, so this all make believe this isn't real, or just in a game, he couldn't help him. Even he could not help himself in memory to remember what matters. So I close with that. And again, I kind of spirated a little bit with my points. So thank you for humoring me.
No, magnificent. I'll throw it to Michael, and if anyone else wants to speak. No, I think this topic is very, very important because I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but there is a sense to me where there is a way to get better at memory, and yet it is more of a stewardship. So I've been thinking a lot on this point of how I experience thought, like how I experience it. And like for me, the name of the game is actually to have a kind of mode of life where you let it makes me think of wind's letting. Like there's a certain sort of letting thoughts come over you more than summoning them, right? Like, so for me, to be good at memory means that you take walks. Well, what does walks have to do with memories? Well, because when you're taking walks, you actually let memories come through you, right? Like, for example, one of the reasons I think reading books is important, like this is a very different, so I know we've talked about the difference between remembering or recollecting and memory, right? So throughout most of my life, the experience has been people read books in order to recollect the right information at the right time for the test or whatever, right? My experience has been I actually want to read a lot to have things in me that can come together and kind of surprise me with ideas I wouldn't have had unless I read those things, right? So I experience myself mostly as, I don't know, a pot I'm putting a lot of stuff in and I don't know what's going to come out, right? Like, because that experience of just finding myself in thinking, finding myself in memory seems to be the secret to thinking, is more than trying to own it or control it or summoning at will. What you do is instead submit yourself to forces that you don't have control over. But this is also, for me, getting at this tension between freedom and choice, right? Like, what I'm trying to do is choose a life where I'm actually ready for the thoughts that come upon me, and also not getting swept up in that angry voice where you're mad at your coworker and you just find yourself in the shower talking bad about them because of this thing that occurred, right? You're like, no, negate that, right? Negate that. As opposed to when you have this experience of, say, Esperanza or Mary Rose, you want to cultivate that and let that go through, right? And so there's some sort of, to me, on this idea, I do think it's completely the case that thinking is primarily rightly experienced as something that is not yours, but instead something that you steward. The interesting question is, for me, the relation of, like we've been talking a lot before, the relation of choice and freedom in this, right? Where it seems as if the freedom is found in a certain letting of memory, and the choice is on the side, perhaps, of making space for the memory, of stewarding the memory, of being able to receive the memory, of being prepared for the memory. that goes into kind of this high order causation. Those are thoughts that come to mind. But I think really the relationship between freedom of choice, because we've been having a talk, and I'll throw it to Michael here and then Clayton. Um, we've been talking at the net over the last few weeks on how the great mistake, dare I say, of bad liberalism, because everyone's against liberalism now, but then of course they want to replace it with problematic political projects or different things. But the main mistake of what you could say libertarian liberalism is the conflation of choice and freedom, is that to have choices to be free, when actually choice and freedom are opposites often. They're in conflict with one another. And that freedom is not merely having more choice, but actually the ability to be free in a determination, free in a restriction, free in something you don't control, right? But we tend to associate more choice with more freedom when actually you only have freedom if you're able to find freedom in a determination. And this is why I think this topic of memory that you're pointing out, Mr. Jockin, is a very important, and the right kind of phenomenology of thought is a big deal, because right there actually highlights, if you conflate freedom and choice, you're going to have a different relationship to memory than if you realize you actually need to separate freedom and choice. That's going to change how you relate to those things. There's more to be said, but let me throw it to Michael here. Michael, please.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, the reason Daniel knows I'm reading Faulkner is because I sent him this quote from that book, Light in August, that I knew he would have thoughts on. That it was a couple sentences. I can't remember the whole thing now, but the first sentence, he says, memory believes before knowledge remembers," or something like that. And it was just like, it just struck me because it was just like in the middle of this like dialogue, and then he just drops something like that, and then he just goes back to the scene. You're like, well, hold on, like let's stop and just think about that for a second. And yeah, it just made me think about how memory is not simply just, I mean, everything you said, Daniel, it's like memory isn't just simply information retrieval. It's not simply, like this cognitive process of, our brain going back into, its recesses and then retrieving something and then bringing it back into consciousness. Like it has a certain, I don't know, telos to it almost. Like, and something I was thinking of is as I read that line, and as we've just been speaking now, is the sense that memory isn't just something that exists in the past. It's like it's something that can inform the future. Like we, whether it be like insanity is repeating something over and over and getting it and trying to thinking you'd get a different result. Like we often use our memory to inform like what our preferences are, what we want to move towards, or I guess also like memories can use us, and it can kind of be like an unconscious process that we have one bad painful breakup and we decide, okay, I'm never dating again, just based on that painful memory. And that's it's like it's a very real thing. I hear it all the time. Like people like, I'm just not dating anymore because I had a painful experience, when I was 16 or whatever. And so there's a capacity with memory to have this like belief, this very real kind of grip on us. And that's maybe like the part we want to negate. But I think, what you said, Daniel, also of like having all of this, imagery and story and symbolism, and also, the memories of our own life, like at a moment's notice that can surface and can kind of strike us, and then unveil, like for me, it's like it kind of unveils new possibilities that were kind of already latent, like already there. But it's like now I see my life in a story I read and be like, oh, like I'm actually kind of living that right now. Like right now I have very big life decision to make. I was offered a spot at a practicum site for my counseling program, and it starts in January, and I was only expecting to start in September, and so now I'm like trying to consider this, and a lot would have to be shuffled around, logistically, financially, all of that to make it work, and it's kind of been this process of like, I feel like both my head and my heart want me to do both things. And it's like usually it's kind of my head's in one place and my heart's in the other. And now it's like it feels like both of these choices feel, both, I guess, rationally and I don't know, non-rationally, to use your term, right. And I I feel like I'm kind of in that like Birdie and Donkey situation where it's like I see both, both kind of good options, and it's like, I kind of want to do both, but I also at the same time I'm noticing how that kind of just leads to this kind of like cyclical paralysis. So I guess something before I throw it back that I've just been thinking about is like, and I'm curious what anyone's thoughts are on it, is like, how do we ultimately make decisions? I think it's very easy for us to say like, oh, we use rationality, right? We make our pro and con list, or we make our risk benefit analysis or whatever. And we think through things methodically like that, and then we make the right decision or the best decision. And it's like, no, I think we all do those things, but I think ultimately what gets us over the hump is, well, for some people it might just be kind of impulsive emotionality, but I think even in the kind of I guess best of circumstances, it's something that pulls us, right? It's like our beatific vision, so to speak, like that whatever decision we feel can move us more closely to that is kind of ultimately what we, and it's like what faculty of the brain body, I think Clayton's paper on being a steward of the body and paying attention to those signals and messages that sometimes come from the gut or the heart or wherever. So yeah, I'd just be curious, especially with like the freedom and choice kind of distinction, and having freedom in choice. That's also been something that I've been thinking about and trying to apply to this decision that I'm making. But yeah, I'll pass it back.
Oh, those are all really great topics. And I think they're actually related because I think there is something about the mystery of thinking and how we experience thinking that is actually tied to this question of decision. Because I think what Mr. Jockin is pointing to is the notion of the very fact that memory seems to choose us more than we choose it suggests revelatory potential. And there is a suggestion that it is only in something like revelation that we find freedom. Like the modern man has tried to find freedom in choice, autonomous rationality, but actually you don't. Like you have to, like Philip Reeve had that lovely line where he said that it is not, it is a mistake to think that man longs to choose, rather man longs to be chosen. And I think that starts to get at it. Now, what's very interesting is if you look at Faulkner, kind of the tragedy of Faulkner is in some respects you have families that feel chosen by something they don't want to be chosen by, or they feel chosen or haunted by the loss of the Confederacy, the loss of the antebellum South, where it's actually a wonderful connection because in Faulkner, memory chooses you. Like you're in memory. Memory is the way the river runs along the rocks. It's not in your head. It's in the territory all around you. And also critically, perhaps one of the key novels is Absalom, where story, narrative, memory, fiction, decision, investigation are all blurred together in trying to actually come to terms with Quentin is trying to figure out what actually happened. But Faulkner has the line where the past isn't even past. But what's very interesting, like, and I'll throw it to Clayton here, because you're also saying about decision. So there is something like we've talked about from before, where I just have a radical view where we create distinctions, say memory, creativity, thinking, when actually I think those are arbitrary distinctions where in the act of thought itself, it is phenomenologically all the same. The memory, the creative act, you actually see them all, and you only can tell the difference between a memory, quote unquote, and a creative act by reference to the external world outside the frame of the image, right? Well, that means in its imminent that means in the imminency of the mental image, if you were the mental experience, it's actually identical, right? It's all the same. And we make these arbitrary distinctions, and I think this actually gets in the way of us really experiencing the mystery of what thinking is. Like thinking is seemingly it seemingly has well, and then we've also talked about dream equality. Um, for me, basically, the issue is if we don't come to terms with what thinking is, what memory is, and what we're talking about, then we're just going to let it carry us along in a manner that leads to dream equality, which is self-effacement, just AI, the dream of AI, total fungibility, logic of capital, everything we've been talking about, right? So we have to have a right relationship with memory. But the question is, how do you have a relationship, the right relationship with something that is outside your autonomy? That is not something entirely controlled. Well, one of the temptations is to say that we do entirely control it, right? Well, that leads to the pathologies of autonomous rationality, right? So there seems to be some sort of relationship that has to be cultivated that seems to be on the side of stewardship, but how? And what is that? What does it look like to have agency but not fall into autonomy, right? What does it look like to have agency, to have participation, but not to have autonomous rationality? I think also basically the ability, I want to say more on the decision, but I'll throw it to Clayton. Gaining the right relationship with thinking, I think, is tied to decision making. Because, like, for example, um, what is what's the best thing to do to make the decision you're talking about? Should you sit down with a piece of paper and write a formula and your reasons, or should you go take a walk? Which should you do? Um, I can tell you from a reading of a whole lot of biographies, the answer seems to be taking a walk. But how in the world does taking a walk help you make decisions? It doesn't make any sense. Well, that's part of the mystery. Like, that's the mystery. Like, to get that, you seem to have to do things in your life to understand why that works versus simply the rational calculation, right? The same goes with writing great novels. How many times are great novels a product of taking a walk as opposed to doing the plot outline, all the character details, and all of those different things, right? Why is that? I'll pause and throw it to Clayton here, and then Mr. Jockin and anyone else.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, decision making. Thanks, Michael. You come up with the easy ones, don't you? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. Hey, it's a tough one. But I think to use Daniel, your language, it's more about the preparation. It's all setting up the conditions that will support I'm sorry for the language, but like for the decision to emerge, because there's the concept of obviousness. So I know we use the term the way we use it now. When you look back, like to its etymology, like obviousness is something being in the way. So it's weird, but like you have to. If something just blocks your way, then of course you have to deal with it. But you can't choose to block your way, right? You can't be intentional about what you're using to block your way. So in a case where you have to make a decision, then you're gonna have to choose what blocks to put in your way, such that they're the ones that you're able to relate with, because going back to memory, it's all a borrow of a Vakian language here, like, going to his ways of knowing. It seems with each way of knowing, you have a kind of memory associated to it, which is very different. So if you go with his basic 4 ones, then you'd have 4 different kinds of memories that you're dealing with, and they're all intertwined in the moment. And I guess that's why you get the anxiety when you have to make a decision, because you have to delineate between all those 4 kinds of memories and then realign them in such a way that you can sense into, so that if you can sense into that, then you can make sense. And then if you can make that sense, then you will have, you unlock you'd say the relationship with them that allows you to have what you would experience as an understanding. And then it's no longer about making the choice. It's about just taking the next step on that journey, because at that point, it's obvious because you've aligned all the pieces in the right way that makes the next step obvious. But if you explain that to someone trying to decide that this is what you have to do, and it starts with taking a walk, I don't know, they just think you're crazy, because you're like, what do you mean? I need to go for a walk. So, well, because then the walk allows you to get back to the right pace, and then the right pace is going to allow you to relate, in the right way. And if you relate in the right way, then you're going to have all the pieces where they need to be. And then when they're all where they need to be, then you will know what you have to do next. But if you say all of that, it's just too much. It's like, leave me alone. You're asking too much of me. Yeah, and so it's hard. It's hard. But the other thing I wanted to add to that is it's sort of what I described as the corruption of the correct, right? It's like we are heavily corrupted by what is correct, and that is leading us to equivocate what is correct with what is right, and the correct right distinction, and we conflate them a lot, and most of the time we're mixing them up. We're trying to make a correct decision. Correct is only applicable to the particular, right? It's a very particular thing, but right is almost formal. It's like it holds all the corrects, but we get confused and think that the correct is also the right, but they are not. Like you have many corrects within the right, and I guess that's where the religious people would ask you to be more righteous, because you kind of like need to swim within the realm of rightness. But that means for you to acknowledge all the other corrects that you may disagree with and allow them to be, going to winds letting be. So you have to, you do have to let be. Otherwise, if you don't let the other corrects be, then it's like you're endangering the realm of the right. You're endangering righteousness in general if you don't allow the others to be correct and appreciate their contribution to that which is right. And yes, it may look different for you where you are, and it may look contradictory, but you have to kind of like step in their position of what is correct for you to see how that is also right. And it's very hard because we're corrupted and trapped by the correctness of where we are, because it's mostly experiential. And in some way, like, if you're in a nice correct spot, it gives you, it pays off with deep relations and lots of beauty. And so you can't let go. It's like, what do you mean there's another version that isn't, let's see if we get some views for this, the what is it, Stranger Things, the upside down, like there's another world upside down, like there is one there. Is that even imaginable? But anyway, I think bringing all that together, like, it's a lot of work. Like, I think we're called to do so much more to maintain all these varying memories, which are all dynamic and changing, and we have to align them by participating in them. It's like with each participation, you unlock a relation. It's between you, the knower, and that which you're knowing, and then you have a knowledge emerging, but there's very many of them, and you have to try and connect them in all the right ways such that they all work together in a harmony, and it's all communal. And yeah, but it's crazy. Hey, it's just it's too much. So it's just easier to kind of go like, you know what, I'll just toss a coin. I'll just guess. So I'll do what everyone else is doing, and that also works to a certain degree. I think I'm rambling now. I'm gonna stop there and pass it back.
No, not at all. Well, that very like so there's a question, there's a certain coordination of all of those different levels. But then of course any way that you would choose to coordinate those levels could ultimately just be what's the standard, correct or right? And is it based on your own ego? Is it based on the incorporation of the other? You know, is it relative to your givens, which could be closing off the other? There are all those different challenges. And I think you know, but thinking of what you're saying, and also Michael and what Mr. Jockin is pointing out. So, you know, I'm trying to think of my own mental experience of myself, and perhaps what would be helpful that I haven't always done, admittedly, is if we put recollection on the side of when I'm right now, like right then, choosing to see the image of me going off that hill when I was about 12 on the sleigh and slamming my head into a tree. And then it goes black because I actually got a concussion. But I remember that, right? But that's more like a recollection versus the experience of laying in bed and then seeing the entire plot of Blackout. Experience of when you are suddenly at 4 in the morning, you see Esperanza dancing and you write that, or you see a kind of, you get this sort of experience of um, various ideas or various visions or these kind of experience of something passing through you, right? Another way to talk about this, there's a distinction in a paper called Experiencing Thinking in Reconstructing A as A on the difference between low order causation and high order causation. And, you know, we've spoken about it. Low order causation is when a billiard ball goes across the table, it hits another and it moves. High order causation is when a billiard ball goes across the table, hits another. And I remember my sister who I used to play pool with, and I decided to call her, right? Like there is no necessary causal link between the billiard balls hitting and me calling my sister. And yet there's a very real cause and effect there, right? So perhaps recollection is on the side of low order causation, where memory is on high order causation. High order causation is not something you choose. You do not choose to remember your sister when you see those billiard balls hitting one another. It just appears. You choose how you respond. And I know Mr. Jockin has made those points, but the causal link is not something you choose. It kind of just appears to you, right? And then that gives you an opportunity to choose, right? And there's something about that moment that is a possibility of freedom. Like there's something about that moment that has some possibility of freedom in it. I'm also like on that as well, like on this question of decision making. Like I guess I'll look on my own life and then I'll throw it to Jockin and Michael. I think on my own decision making, like, but a key variable I guess I'm bringing up is both of these jobs kept me an open space, if you will, for things to surprise me. That's always been, because for me, the key, like the main thing Michelle and I feel like we're supposed to do is OG Rose, right? Well, that is going to, so that is your kind of right versus correct, right? Like what, like maintaining that, and it has a kind of mystery to it, but it's also this kind of life of surprise, this life of things appearing. You know, glimmers and glimpses, the beautiful Geopedia friendship, right? And so we've made decisions based on what doesn't infringe upon that, right? And so, and then was it the case that like, could have there been better jobs than Mead Lake or something? Maybe, but it's something that arose. It was an opportunity, and it didn't infringe upon the main thing. So I think the first thing I'd say on making decisions, I do think there's a general, like, you need to decide what is the thing you want working through you and what decisions keep you as that open space. Like what decisions keep you as your open space? Maybe the thing you want to work through you is something involving therapy. Maybe it's something involving writing. Maybe it's something athletics. Well, okay, which of the decisions you have is going to keep you open to be this kind of portal, catalyst, you know, immediate thing that stuff is coming through? And that is going to be the right decision, not just the correct decision, right? And I think you do, to what Clayton is saying, I think you have flexibility. Like you could have done the wholesale Mead Lake and I'm sure like 80 other jobs, right? That would have been just as good as the others, because all 80 of those would have kept you an open space for things to come out of you in a high order causal way, right? But not every decision. Some decisions, maybe even decisions that paid more. Here's the other thing. Most of the job, the possibilities, I didn't choose things that I suppose would have paid more and maybe had more, I don't know, career opportunity or whatever, because it took my brain, because it took my mind. So those were wrong for me. They might be right for someone else, but they were wrong for me, right? Because I never thrived in an environment involving mental work where I couldn't tell the boss that I'm going to go take a walk to figure this out, right? But like, no, you're going to write a paper and a report and it's going to be graded, right? No, I can't do that. I got to take a walk. And like Clayton's saying, that makes no sense to them, and they're not going to pay you to take a walk unless you get, I don't know, into the Advanced Institute or something. So, that didn't work. So, but you can, as you're setting up chairs and tables, you can be thinking about whatever you want, right? And then you can be writing notes. So for me, I guess I guess two beginning heuristics that I think are related to this topic. I've made decisions personally on basis of what I was afraid to do, so on basis of courage, and then on a basis of what kept me. I guess I want to use the language of clearing in the Win language of Heidegger, like what kept me a certain clearing for things to come through, right? And what decisions maintain those conditions. And I'm not saying those are the universal heuristics of all decision making, but I have found them important for me because otherwise I don't experience myself as a constant source of surprise, as a constant source of the unknown, a constant source of mystery, and a constant source of intrinsic motivation. And I suppose I've decided that if you lose those things, you lose something very human that is very, very important. So it's always been right to make decisions to kind of maintain those things. Those are opening. I'll pause and throw it to Jockin and then Michael here. Mr. Jockin.
So much to be said. So where do I start? Okay. I think the first thing is related to decision making. I think I'll start there. So the first thing is, yeah, because the presumption of writing everything down is the assumption you can map on all the criterion right from the get-go. Everything's known. And yes, it's a certain, and I know people who argue for this this method of decision making usually do say, well, no, you do it based on what you know. It's rational to act based on what you know now. So if new information shows up you didn't know about, you were still rational in your decision making. I want to be a little fair. I know I see people having reactions to that, but that's usually the rhetorical response because it's all but and it's funny from my perspective because in their attempt to try to salvage the strengthen the method, it actually reveals the flaw of the method from the get-go, right? The autonomous rationality of self-forgetting. It just forgets that it is an error and just says, oh no, well, you just used your information was available to you and that's how you decided. But it's a larger thing I want to talk about with this. So two notes. One is so I'm doing my work on de-animal right now. And the big theme I'm seeing in the moment is the human person in time. Time becomes this essential quality for Aristotle in this text. I don't think it's any way to take. I'll give you one example. I pulled up my notes just to talk about it. Wait, I had it for a second. There are two particular ones. One is only a person, an entity in time can have conflicting desire. You have to be like the mark of you being a person with conflicting desire is that you're in time. That's one note from Aristotle. That's the first one. The second part is this trip up line. I'm like losing my mind about it. Like I've been writing pages and pages and pages of notes because the implication is crazy. Aristotle says, and I believe it's in book 3. Only man, and then the word is basically it's with seeing. So with knowing, it's the eidos. It's the form of seeing, knowing, that state. So it's with seeing in time according to 3 positions. And it's insight. Basically, it's a nous, is another kind of active state of nous. Nous, a rounding stance of the object. So the Greek for it means kind of working around the object, and desire of the self-desire, not number. I think that I find that amazingly entertaining. Just amazing Aristotle went down that route. And he connects it to a relationship of basically of nous, perception, and the phantasms. What I'm getting at here is, so notice this, is that this is actually why, to kind of thread this point of why is proiesis so important, and specifically deliberation with others, so important for Aristotle. It's because it's in that discursive state, working with others, to reveal these 3 aspects in time of desire, of what is the good we're orienting towards. And now another area line from Aristotle about this is the whole point that actually the reason why there's a conflict of desire in the human person in time is because news bids us to wait, and desire, basically appetitive desire, influences us by what is present at hand. So I've said this in multiple net sessions over the years about wisdom being the time box window preference. That's what this all comes down to in a lot of ways. What time window? Because that's the thing too. This is another good point. When we talk about even making deliberate decision making, writing everything down, pros and cons, under what time frame? Which time frame we're talking about? So there's that question in the top of my head, and then I'll pivot this to a personal, is my decision making story over time, because I think the biggest bet, I mean, if I kind of had a heuristic, I know Daniel's talking about space for thought, space for surprise. I think space for play, space for humor. If you can't laugh in your life, then nothing's wrong in your life. And that's a huge mark. I think it is important that I think also the human person that kind of has to fight for this is, I think time energy as a concept is an excellent point to talk about this, to kind of clarify with a concept what Daniel talks about with this kind of keeping space. I think I'm going to flesh this out a little bit more as a space for humor, a space for play, a space for free motion and movement. That's not just this kind of crushing state. I do think part of this is that you need to create, basically, you have to doggedly fight for that space, especially in the beginning. So the only, and kind of in terms of self-development literature, is always the argument of, or claims that you have to earn that freedom of space by usually fighting for it any way you can in the beginning, in any space of opening in time to attenuate, to create that space towards your long-term vision. And that's the key. This is why you got to start with a proactive stance of what is the vision of what we're trying to do. What are you trying to do with your life? And you have to orient around that. So the typical example is, let's say, basically, if you have long commutes. So that's usually number one buster. People have like 2-hour commutes, right? 3-4 hour commutes. Or is that time going to be used as dead space? Or are you going to use it towards audiobooks? Like fighting for the love of God for something to kind of get this towards some process. I actually remember for many parts of my life when I had long commutes, that's exactly what I did. Audiobooks were my godsend, let alone having journaling, writing notes. I think that's another aspect of basically having freedom in choice. So when you make decisions, or when you're having these, even in situations where you feel attenuated, where you're kind of impressed, kind of compressed down, these small decisions you can make to kind of start breaking out. That's just a tangent note. But my larger note to say is, I was going to say, I think investments and commitment to people. Even when betrayed, even when disappointed, even in the, again, Chloe opened up with, it can happen. That's always the risk of human persons. They can betray you. There could be betrayal, ruptures of breakage, but you know what? And I've had that in old times in my life. It's still worth it. That is, I only say that because, listen, when I joined undergrad, I had just the youth. I talked about this last net session. I had this youthful energy of, I want art. That's what I knew. I just knew in a general sense. It was general. It wasn't particularized. It wasn't like I was going to do typeface design for reading comprehension improvement. I didn't know that when I was 19. Get out of here. Didn't know any of that. All I had was just a general desire, a living desire, as Aristotle was saying, but no orientation. It was just not there yet. It was a human person. It was my instructor, Joshua Darden, type designer, who showed me a possibility of what to be. What might I be like? Now, they can obviously get captured into kind of mimetic desire capture. I want to but channeled the right way. This gave an orientation that transformed my whole life. I've never regretted that absolute commitment to love, commitment to the other and love. I will always back that up and never hesitate on this point. I've never been disappointed in that. And that's kind of my note, actually, by the way. And again, like, I know everyone, I don't know why I'm getting some animated about this topic about memory, but I only say this because I don't disagree. It could be improved. There's a certain, I think as part of it, first of all, one, I'm not disagreeing that there is primary and secondary causation. I'm not disagreeing with this point. Okay, so we can get, and I don't disagree there are bodily aspects and memory, something can be improved. But nevertheless, isn't it interesting when you love something, memory comes to you couldn't remember so easily? What I say this is on multiple grounds. One, when I was really studying Aristotle and I fell in love with Aristotle and I fell in love with Plato, you know, I would remember, like, I know, and that's what I would do. I would reread and reread and reread and write notes and then triangulate the notes and then do other things. It was, and I noticed, and I actually remember people who were reading text with me, they wouldn't remember things, but I would. But I actually realized what I was doing was actually the same thing with someone I love, my friends or my beloveds. When you love someone, you don't, its memory comes very easy, doesn't it? Because you attenuate to them and you remember things. And in fact, one of the best gifts you can give to friends is remembering them, especially when they're depressed or sad or defeated or they're at their lowest state. You remind them who they are. Your friends actually do that for you. That's actually one of the most important gifts of friendship, in my opinion. This is why it gets strong about this point, because I think at the core of what it means to be human is this aspect of memory in these ways. But I'm not disagreeing. There are skills involved with it, but the skills are useless without the foundation principle behind it. It will just be operationalized as some kind of operation of the good. It's inevitable. So that's also, but I'm not dismissing these points. Good sleep, hydrating. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, those things do matter. If you're not sleeping, your memory is blown out, guaranteed. You're addicted to apps, memory is blown out, etc. Right? I'm not disagreeing with any of those points, but I think the human person in time and the activity of decision making under that reality means not only is the deliberative space of working with others, talking with others on the search, on the joint project, and asking what is the good life and what is to be attended to under what time frame. That's a huge area question point right there, or just point. And the other note is this aspect that there are actually multiple things going on in desire. That is not just simply a calculation by number. The fact that Aristotle points that out just tells us explicitly that shows us he was understanding the human person in time as a very different kind of entity than any other kind of entity. Because, and again, the part that really news in the observing from different perspectives, like different stances, seeing from different points of view, none of those things make sense to me. But that self-desire, that's the part that really trips me up. So that means that what I'm getting about that when I mean literally desire of the self. So like a kind of mode of self-love, which Augustine, immediately running to Augustine on this immediately when I'm thinking of that. The fact that the decision making and the self, and this is my way, it's the simultaneous seeing. I'm also bringing this up because that's also what it justifies my claim multiple weeks ago about how memory works with partial objects, both a person and things. How can you see something and see multiple things at the same time from it? Aristotle's giving you the answer because there's different channels, and only the human person has this. No, that's all I got. I'll stop there.
No, I don't disagree with any of that. And maybe let me clarify. When I'm talking about improving memory, what I have in mind is like I experience memory as almost like the reward of virtue. Like memory is what you're rewarded with when you actually act in courage. Like, so like to clarify, because I've not been, like, to me, improving memory, it's not this thing you do by how many words can I remember, or kind of like that different thing. It actually, like, when you are able to cultivate friendship because you know humor, when you're actually, say, reading books so that you can have conversation, then what you experience is the fullness of memory. But it's almost like memory is not improved directly, I suppose, because then it's almost as if you turn it into idolatry versus having this more spiritual experience. You're making it yours. When really you need to focus on the virtue, you need to focus on the beautiful. And then because you do those things, you just find yourself in memory. You find things coming over you that then you experience. And so, you could argue that memory makes life worth living in this sense, because it's precisely this sort of flowing over you of the beautiful and actually of the fullness of life. And so I think what you're saying as well, like once you actually are able to love, like there's a real sense in which until you fully love, you don't know what memory is. until you actually have deep friendships, you haven't experienced memory, because all you've ever had is these moments of recollection. I mean, most people fear memory because they actually haven't cultivated friendship or they haven't acted in virtue. And so memory is something that they're actually kind of almost avoiding. In many respects, they don't want to have that spiritual connection. And when memory comes upon them, it can be something that they fear or that they dread or they want to get away from. But then at the same time, it can also be kind of a Flannery O'Connor movement of grace in the violence, because it's actually the spirit reaching for you even in that movement, because it's calling you to change your life potentially. So I don't disagree at all that the experience, this is why to me the phenomenology of the artist, the experience of thinking itself becomes, really does not mystify us as much as it should, because we experience it purely in terms of autonomy, of autonomous rationality, and we lose track of the non-rational that makes the rational possible. This thing that chooses us, that then from which we choose. This thing we find ourselves in without willingness, and then we can will our attention according to. We miss that quick move, that quick appearance, that then we retrospectively interpret as something that we by our own volition brought about. And therefore we become the measure of all things. So I completely agree with that. And I'll throw it to Michael and then Cleo here. I'll just say quickly, I also agree with what you're saying on fighting for your time, fighting for spaces of play and humor. Completely agree with that. I mean, if I look at my own decision, also too, you want a job where people honor your time. Like if you're at a job where your boss, like, I made sure to have jobs where if there's literally nothing to do, that the boss isn't like wanting you to go do something meaningless, right? If there's nothing to do, he's totally cool with you working on your paper until the next tour shows up, right? I'm not going to work for someone who's going to be like, oh, in that 10-minute gap, they feel like they own you, because that shows no respect for your persons, right? Are you getting the job done? Are you getting done what needs to be done? Yes. Are you doing everything with reason? Good. So they honor your time, right? They're not nitpicking. They're not micromanaging, right? So so you need to make decisions where you go, you're going to be among people who honor your time, who respect your time, who also trust you, right? Who trust that you're actually there to do the job well. Because if you're in a place where everyone is kind of monitoring one another to make sure you're doing the job, that's no good, right? That's kind of anti-relational as well. So fighting for the time of what honors your time. I think also too, I'll also say this, I think a lot of people actually end up making decisions that take away from them being a vessel for spirit or this sort of space, because they say there's more time, status, and money. I think there's actually a lot of great opportunity. And I'm not saying for you, Michael, I'm just saying in general. I think there's a lot of opportunities for people that if they're just willing to kind of go through perhaps some humbling or even social humiliation, will actually pay for bills and actually help them take care of things and leave them with space to sort of cultivate these things that they don't take because of the fear of being seen as doing something inferior or mechanical work or something like that. That can happen to people, I think. I think also another key idea is you do need to make a decision. Whatever decision you need to make sure you're going to a place where friendship is afforded, where friendship is possible, where friendship can be coordinated, as Jockin is pointing to. Because I think actually the fullness of the experience of memory, because there's something interesting here about how do you experience the fullness of memory, the fullness of spirit, how do you live a life where you really feel that washing over. I think the ability to cultivate friendship is really, really important. And that actually, if you don't cultivate friendship, that takes away from the ability to be this sort of vessel. And I actually think the ability to be this vessel is completely tied to our ability ultimately today to handle pluralism and difference. And if we can't handle difference, that cuts off the fountainhead, if you will. I'll pause and throw it to Michael, then Cleo here. Michael, please.
Yeah, oh gosh, there's so much to talk about. I probably won't even get to all the things on my notes, but yeah, what you were saying earlier, Daniel, about being chosen versus choosing, and kind of the anecdotes that have been shared by Thomas and you about decisions you've made in your life just made me remember when I was 12, my parents got divorced, and it was very messy and not amicable. And so we had court mandated therapy with my dad and my sister and I. And I remember one day coming home, and I don't know what I said, but I was psychoanalyzing as much as a 13-year-old could do or whatever to my mom. And clearly whatever I said impressed her, because she was like, oh, you should be a therapist one day. Like, you would be a really good therapist one day. And I remember thinking in that moment, like, hell no. Like, that is the last thing I want to do. Like, I was seeing it play out, and I was like, if what my family is going through is anything like what I have to, deal with as a professional one day, I want as far away from here as possible. And so, I spent my teen years like kind of repressing that kind of emotional sensitivity, because I kind of I didn't believe in its value. I also kind of saw how it was like, getting me in vulnerable situations, and, like I was getting messages as like a growing guy of like, oh, that's just, that's not what you want to cultivate. Especially, in your teen years or whatever. And then I had this experience where I had my first panic attack sophomore year of college. Like, I was just being inundated with all of these, basically all the messages from my childhood that I like never processed, and it kind of just like crushed me. And I started seeing a therapist, and it was like it was such a radical shift. It was like, oh, this person lives a life that is beautiful. And I'm like, not only like am I like watching that, like I am like the beneficiary of that. Like, I am participating and experiencing that for myself. And it was really a feeling of like being chosen. Like, I remember one day I was like, I realized like this is what I want to do. And he's like, I know. Like, I've known. And now, like, I'm in my grad program, and he's basically like a career coach and a mentor and a supervisor and a therapist and a friend, like all kind of wrapped up into one. And it was really an experience of like, if someone tells you you're good at something or you should do something, but you haven't seen that for yourself, like you haven't fully realized that, or you haven't had like this virtuous model of that thing, like it can actually feel quite like, I think well-meaning people, when they say that, it feels like it's like a gift to give someone, to tell them like, oh, you're good at this thing, you should do this thing. But I think oftentimes for people who receive that message, who aren't intrinsically motivated yet to that thing, it can actually feel quite imprisoning, because it's like, well, if I'm good at sports, but I decide I want to do theater, like I would be disappointing everyone, and I may be stepping into something that I shouldn't I shouldn't be doing, or I don't have the like experience in or wherewithal in. But like, when you feel that, I think when you feel that kind of tap on the shoulder, that kind of trust, yeah, like it I think it comes back to trust. It can unlock a totally new avenue of possibilities. And I think in my life, I've tried to make decisions that and they haven't always worked out. A lot of them haven't. And so sometimes I question, my own kind of intuition and instincts, but I've tried to make decisions where that portal to what I experienced in that therapy room with him, like of beauty, of kind of spaciousness, of wholeness, of like ability to play, and to, Luber was talking last week. I wasn't there, but he was like, I was in this philosophy class, and my philosophy professor allowed me to not know what I was saying, and like he was there with me, and he permitted me to be that way, and he kind of drew out like, you know, more and more from me. And yeah, what you were saying about friendship, 100%, like, and that's in my decision right now, like that's a large part of what I'm moving towards. And it's kind of ironic, you know, I'm at a point in my life where I'm realizing the like passionate desire I had when I was younger to leave and to, you know, to move away from my hometown, and all the, you know, you see all the ills of it. And now, you know, I've moved to a couple different places and tried to cultivate community. And I think because of the kind of oppressive job environments that I've had, it's like that taps your energy to do that. I'm like, well, I want to move back to where my friends are and where my church is. And now this practicum site, that from what I've heard is like the exact right environment to kind of cultivate more of that. And it's like, you, like in my experience, it's like you can look past and deal with so many negative aspects of whether it be an environment or a place or a financial situation, if you have friends. Like, I mean, as corny as it sounds, like it really is true. Like you can really take on like just about anything you have if you have friends to come back to. And yeah, one last thing, and then I'll pass it back. Like, this idea of recollection versus memory is really interesting to me, and I think I think when people recollect, they often create meaning that can entrap them. So like, you know, if all, you know, if you have this pattern of taking jobs that don't work out, and you know, the next leap you want to take, the next new career or the next whatever, your family is always reminding you like, oh, well, here he goes again. Like that one's that, you know, that one's not going to work out. And it's like, that's the recollection that, you know, is like used as kind of this entrapment of like, you're, you know, you're just going to repeat the, you know, the failures of your past or whatever. Versus like memory, like Cleo said in the chat, like memory is liberation. And like to have a like a strike of memory that like, I don't know, inspires future action, like that's more than mere recollection. It's more than just kind of the data points or the facts of of the past. It's like, it's there's back to Faulkner, it's like there's like a belief, there's like a belief to it. There's something drawing you in, and you know that might prove like utterly disastrous. But it's like, but it seems to me that it's more painful to stay in a place based on like the rational reasons why, as opposed to act and move based on that kind of strike of memory. Because it's like I'm basically saying no to this spiritual guide, voice, whatever. I'm foregoing that opportunity, as you say, Daniel, to be that vessel for creativity and human, you know, flourishing. Yeah. And I really like that idea of selling your body versus your mind. Yeah, I wish that there was one job I had where I sold my body like crazy. And sometimes my mind, but man, like I was in the Grand Tetons, you know, like killing weeds, and just the amount of beauty that you're saturated in, and you know, just like the amount of like just personal and existential things that I could just work through on a daily basis was yeah, pretty amazing. And I think that's very good career advice, honestly, for people. I think especially like young men, who are kind of, struggling to find an aim. It's like, yeah, do a manual labor job, and like it's actually also like conducive to thinking, I think. That like that physical blue collar thing, instead of kind of sitting and like trying to get the novel. Like I think there's something about that of that movement that releases that. But yeah, I'm rambling, so I'll pass it back.
No, not at all. Absolutely well put. Well, certainly I would highly suggest, like, if you're trying to figure out what do I want to do with my life, go into a place where you can be surprised by the experience of you doing something with your life, like that vision where it taps you on the shoulder, right? And I think what Jockin is point, what is this thing we are calling memory? There is almost a way in which this thing is spirit itself, right? But like, because once you understand memory, you can only tell the difference between memory and imagination relative to outside the mental image, right? And people talk about God speaking to them, prayer, all of these things are the same inner space that is going on, right? And our relationship to this inner space, which I'm now thinking about stewardship and the way that Clayton is talking about, seems to really matter. Like also too, I think with this idea, and I'll throw it to the great Cleo here on this notion of self-love as well. Like there's something where it's actually, so how do you have a self-love without being egotism? Well, you come to love yourself as a certain clearing for the experience of that which isn't you. Like you come to love that experience that you afford of things appearing and manifesting that are not you, or saying things you've never thought before. You come to love your experience of yourself as a source of a kind of surprise, as spirit of life, right? That's the only way to have self-love that's not egotism. It's you loving the kind of other that is you, that otherness that is you, right? Of which memory makes possible. Memory makes yourself a partial object to yourself, right? In the same way as Mr. Jockin is saying, it makes the other a partial object. Well, in Lacan, the partial object is how you get the desire that actually then can possibly move to drive to beauty, that then can be sublated into intrinsic motivation and not fall into the pitfalls of the objective desire, right? So memory affords this possibility of drive that then, of course, makes possible symptom to not the R, the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary. And you yourself can have that experience to yourself if you can undergo yourself as this certain space of surprise. I think the last thing I'll just say quick, because there's more to be said, but I'll throw it to Cleo here. I think too many people make decisions in terms of opportunity and potential versus the space they're entering into. Like you need to make decisions of what space will I enter into if I choose X. Most people say, will X help my career? Will X make a lot of money? They think about X versus Y in terms of quantification and algebra, data points, as opposed to spaces. What space will I go into if I choose X versus Y, right? And if you realize that the space you want to go into is afforded by relationship, by making yourself a clearing for something to come forth. If you think about whatever space you go into as being an extension of yourself, then that becomes really, really important. Not enough people make decisions in terms of the spaces they enter into that determines the quality of space they are themselves. They just make decisions in terms of potential and opportunity, which of course are vague. They're vague. What is opportunity today, tomorrow is a catastrophe. There's a whole lot of potential in being a computer program about a decade ago, and now it turns out that ChatGPT is replacing you, right? Like potential and opportunity is fleeting, but spaces are forever you. And so it really matters what you enter into. And then I think about churches and the loss of eldership and all of these things also being the loss of space making and helping people be space makers and to make decisions in terms of the spaces they enter into. And then it's also going to be perhaps the loss of the art of how to deal with memory. But I will stop and pass it to Cleo here. Cleo, thank you for coming this evening.
Oh my goodness. Thought I was just gonna sort of ride this one out, but I'm suddenly engaged. Guess what? You people are wicked. You're wicked. So first thing I want to talk about, I just want to mention that I think one of the reasons why we don't want to remember, because I have a bad memory for the episodes or the the narrative of my own life, famously. I mean, I can remember things I've read very well. I can remember the color of my kitchen growing up only dimly, right? So I'm always worried about this. And I think one of the things I've come to is, first of all, I want to talk about what makes us resist memory, and secondly, what I want to say are prompts or spaces, as you're saying, Daniel, which I completely agree with, will evoke that kind of memory that we're looking for. Okay, and one of the relational spaces is certainly friendship. In fact, I think it's probably the prime relational space that evokes that. If you're in a love affair, there's too much else going on. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you really don't want to remember. Thank you. Right? And family, it's also loaded. You have no wiggle room there at all. Anyway, I think one of the things that prevents us from wanting to remember is the amount of grief we carry. I think grief is probably the biggest factor in the failure of memory. And I'm thinking about Freud, I'm thinking about, many, many things. I'm thinking about, I'm thinking actually, because I think art is one of the spaces that allows memory to flow in this way. If you do it right. I'm thinking of the moment when Aeneas is shipwrecked on that shore right at the beginning, and he's just been through this huge, massive trauma, personal and political and destiny trauma. And he goes up to that, he's scouting the territory, and he goes up to that little temple, right? And he sees the pictures of the Trojan War, of his own tragic life in front of him. And he's just dumbfounded. And he says, there are tears in things, and mortal things touch the mind, right? I can never read that without weeping, actually, So that's one thing I just wanted to note. The other thing I want to understand better is the role of the prompts that come to us through language, the function of words in this. And of course, I'm thinking of two things. I'm thinking of Lacan's whole insistence, dating from Freud, of course, but even more emphasized on the capacity of words to evoke memory in a very complex way, but evoke higher order memory, right? They can also, of course, force you into an existing paradigm that's wrong, right? They're really very double-edged that way. So I want to just give two instances, and then I want to go and think more. One is, you've made me think of the fact that after one of those, oh, Michael, I'm so with you. After one of the terrible fights between my parents that afflicted my childhood, I was attempting to make peace, my lifelong script that I must finally tear up at some point, and I was telling my father how I saw this. My mother was extremely manic depressive and alcoholic, so there was no talking to her. But my father wanted to understand. He loved her. He wanted to understand, and I was trying to analyze the situation. And I was, again, I think probably about the same age. No, I think it was a little older. I was probably about 16, because it really hit me at a crucial moment. He listened to this analysis that I was providing. My childhood nickname is Cooey, and he said spontaneously, "Oh, Cooey, you're so amazing. You think like a man." And I'm like you when they said you should be a therapist. I'm like, no way, never, right? The last thing I want to do is think like a man. But I have that kind of intelligence. And a lot of my life has been a real struggle with that. A real struggle with having my fate sealed and wanting to change it, from karma into dharma, as we say, right? From a fate into a path. And a lot of my work is about that problem. But I mean, he intended nothing but good, but there was almost that kind of tragic comedy thing that happens between people where the very most highest intention thing has the worst kick, it really announced and described and pinpointed a split in me that I was going to be negotiating for the rest of my life, right? So, my dear father, Dad, I'm fine. Don't worry. Something about that. Now, I'm also thinking about in terms of the way that you cultivate. I think you do cultivate, Daniel. I think this is what you're saying. That is not a contradiction from what Thomas and others are saying. You can cultivate the space that will allow that kind of memory to emerge. And this happens to me. I think of the great American prophet, sage, Catholic saint, Frank Foolscrow. I don't know if you know Foolscrow. And he used to go up every morning to say his prayers, which combined Catholic prayers and native prayers in an unbelievable synthesis. And he would say, hollow bone, hollow bone, hollow bone. I want to be a hollow bone, right? That was his phrase. And that's become my mnemonic, because I am weirdly, don't ask, weirdly preaching every other Sunday in a little local Protestant church here, right? A sign of their desperation that they have turned to me, a woman and a Catholic. I keep telling them I'm a Catholic and I'm also a shaman. Are you okay with this? And they're like, oh, Cleo, you're so cute, we don't care. It is really hilarious. But anyway, I use that charge or responsibility to, and I've really worked on this for the last 2 years or 3 years that I've been doing this, to try to cultivate that space of hollow bone. That's my mnemonic for entering that space. And to bring to it a kind of prior designation by choice of the arena that I'm going to be working in. So I do a kind of form of, first of all, I'm very interested also in the aleatory, the random dimension of this. I follow in my preparation the common lectionary. Okay, so I don't choose the text. What I choose to do is to do a kind of lectio divina with it. There's a kind of free association with it, with the words of the text. I don't do this in a sermon. This is part of my prep, right? No. And then when I get in there, I have prepared some kind of theme. I've primed the pump in some way. Do you see what I'm saying? And it begins to define the field a little bit. It begins to narrow the field. And then at my best, it is just extraordinary. I feel almost like, I don't know, some of my shamanic healing friends say, I do a session and I forget what after it's over, I forget what I've done. Right, I really do enter another zone where I am pretty much being guided about what to say. And I'm always amazed because I always feel like spirit is so efficient. Spirit will remind me of something that's in my memory archive that I never would have thought of, right? In the middle of the sermon. I'll think, oh my God, yes, thank you, Spirit. That I remember that quote now, or I remember that point now. It's really extraordinary. I hope I don't sound like I'm blowing. Believe me, this has nothing to do with me. This is, but it does have to do with me in the sense that I prepare and I have the intent and I know the domain in which I'm going to speak, right? So there's this incredible interplay back and forth between conscious direction, intention, and then also the classic role of slips of the tongue in that. Which can be so amazing. So the last thing I'll say, I just wanted to say all that because I don't have a real space where I can talk about this. First of all, most of the people in my life have absolutely no spiritual practice and no particular religious faith. So I'm like, and then most of them also regard this as some sort of self-inflation. I trust you guys not to feel that way about it. It's not that. I think you're with me on that. But I'm just grateful to be able to talk about it. But I also want to reflect and develop more consciously the repertoire that spirit might need, right? That's what I'm doing, is I'm developing the repertoire, because that's all I can do, really. So it's a very interesting process, and it makes me worry about what will happen to me when my memory starts to fray, which so far so good, but I'm 82, and anyway, those are the existential concerns around that. So there's oh, I forgot I know, the last point I wanted to make is, first of all, there's a woman called Ellie Roberts. I don't know if you know her work on Substack. She is fantastic. She's a deep literary scholar and critic. She's a metaphysician, and she studies the history of magic and John Dee and all stuff like that. And she's been running a series that I haven't been able to attend faithfully, but I've followed, on memory. And she has combined lectures and readings from cognitive scientists who study memory with the archive of conscious ways of cultivating memory, like Francis Yates and, the Renaissance memory tricks and all of that, with practicums, because anybody who really joins that seriously is asked to memorize a significant, longer than our normal attention span segment of their favorite poetry, right? And I just want to leave you with the following rather astounding fact. My vocation, when I finally found it, was as a literary critic. But I have a lot of philosophy in me, as you know. That's the think like a man part. And I've had to label it. I mean, there's thank God there's overlap there. And so I have a great reverence, as Daniel knows, for Harold Bloom, right? Try to justify that. I won't even try, right? Because he was absolutely awful as a person, truly awful. Okay. He was also hilarious. Anyway, long story short, there are only two people that I currently can call to my mind who have total recall of everything they've ever read. Harold was one of them. And the other one, wait for it, which I've learned from Ellie, was Aquinas. So just saying, guys, I'm leaving you with that. I'm leaving you with that lovely thought. Okay. Thanks for listening. And by the way, Thomas, you could have been preaching to me. I mean, I've just today discovered that these people that I have trusted and I am like rocked. I'm humbled, because why would you do that to me? I'm Mrs. Wonderful here, but I'm also disconcerted, and it's hard to stay steady with the fact that I'd rather be me than them, and you really helped me. Thank you, my friend. You helped me there.
Magnificent, Cleo. Thank you very much. And no, with your memory in 82, you'll be that voice when we're giving a sermon that comes out of nowhere to remind us
Okay,
of
all right.
something.
I will be happy to play that role.
Yes, ma'am. And well, the more I've always wondered, so, we can't find memory, right? Like if you look in the brain, we don't know where it is. Well, we also we're spirit, right? I think the relation between memory and spirit is really, really close, like insanely close, to the point where they may be the same thing. And I think, also to what so that's an example, you'll be talking, you'll be doing a sermon, and something comes out of nowhere that you're like, that's it. You experience that thought not as you, and yet it is you and not you at the same time. That doubleness is where the fullness of the human is found. That's what we long for, is experiences of this doubleness. That is not that is not a crude dualism. It has this sort of mysterious quality that's also very concrete, and you only find freedom to the degree that happens to you, and you also come to be confident in that and have faith that that will occur. Like that's when you have meaning of, let's say this, I don't know if you feel like life is meaningful until you get to the place where you're confident that you can take a sermon, you can go up there, and that's going to happen.
Yep.
That's when you go, life is meaningful. That's when I feel free, and that's when life also feels spiritual as well, right?
Absolutely.
Well, what's very interesting is not the way that spirit, quote unquote, tends to reach us in a kind of voice of memory or an experience of memory. That tends to be what it is like when God talks to you, when you have spirit occur to you. And why is it that the creative act, Berjaya, all these different people speak of it as a spiritual behavior. And why is the creative act, which I think Faulkner shows so well, this mysterious blend of recalling the past and making it something new at the same time? There's an eternity in that, is there not?
Yeah.
Like one of the mistakes is I think we over-identify memory with past when really it has more of an eternal quality of the present and past together. And Bergson brought this together. And I think also that the part of the reasons why perhaps memory, and then I'll throw it at Clayton, perhaps one of the reasons memory has hidden itself from us so much is because the word is coded in, you know how they say right coded away? It's like past coded. Like memory is overly past coded, right? When really memory, there's a funny way in which memory is never in the past. It's only in the present, right? Memory is never back there. Memory is only ever here, right? So there's no such thing as a past memory in a weird way, right? There's only a present memory, right? And so memory is necessarily a meeting, a relationship, a friendship even, a bringing kind of together, right? And perhaps one of the reasons too we're confused about having good memory is because we think about good memory as the ability to accurately represent the past, right?
So true.
Which is like good recollecting, but really good memory seems to be the ability to be an artist in the meeting of the present moment with that thing going on in your mind in a manner that feels like you're chosen instead of choosing, that feels like freedom. Like good memory is more like the good stewarding of this meeting space, of this spirit coming forth, right? But since memory is so past coded as a term, we basically, well, then it's interesting because then basically you only have good memory to the degree that you can kind of disembody yourself from the present moment and like perfectly. So there's a kind of disembodiment in the notion of good memory. But actually, if good memory is, and memory is more of an eternal thing, then it's more like good spirit, actually. Like if memory and spirit are the same thing, then to have good memory is more like having good spirit. Well, what does that mean? Well, it has this sort of being able to be a space for this eternal unfolding. And what you're also saying too about, like, I'm not sure, like, if I'm now getting, like, because it's, if I think of my own life, I don't know if there's a single paper I plan to write. Like, every paper I've ever written came out of nowhere. Like, it wasn't like I don't know if I've ever in my life asked the question, what am I interested in? I don't think I've ever asked that question, ever. I just found myself writing Belonging Again. I just found myself reading Peter Berger. I don't know if there's ever been a book that I've gone, I'm interested in that. I have found it in front of me. William Wilson is talking about Flannery O'Connor. Well, I'll read Flannery O'Connor. There's more of this, like, books come at you, right? And that seems to be proper. Like, no, I'm not saying at all that there's anything bad about a research project or saying, because then once this thing pops out at you, you then choose to write on it, which research is, but this popping comes forth first. Then there comes the plan, then there comes the action, but the thing pops forth, right? Like I had no idea I'd work at a wedding venue. I had no idea I'd do, like all of these things have a certain coming. And that then makes it feel like it has to, when it has that experience, it has the possibility of freedom in it. When it doesn't have that experience, then it tends to fall on the side of toil. It falls on the side of your own effort, your own work, as opposed to instead having a chosen sort of experience to it. And all of that feels spiritual. It feels way more when the paper is that you didn't play on the paper, it's just there, then it feels like spirit. And your experience of it popping into your head is phenomenologically the same as memory. It is memory. It is like memory. It is there, right? So there's a way in which what we call memory is the gift of eternity. Like it is eternity in you now. And it's just that we overcode the word memory in past. And as instead of the meeting place of all time in the eternal now. Memory is the eternal now, to use that language, that kind of Bergsonian. And that eternal now is the birthplace of also the future. And is not creativity the future in that sense, right? Like it, and so it's all in the eternal now. And we have this more stewardship role of that. I have more notes, but I'm going to stop and throw it to Clayton and then Mr. Jockin. Thank you for what you shared, Cleo. Clayton, please.
No, thank you. Yeah, wow. While Cleo was speaking, the image that came to me was from Dune. So in Dune, they have these uh, things called golas, where they create a body from from someone, and they try to bring them back to life. And in the it's like there's something interesting about it, because they take these cells and they grow a whole body in a tank somewhere, and it's just a body. There's no, that person is not in there yet. And to instantiate that body into the person, it has to be under the right circumstances. They dramatize, the event, and then in the dramatization of the event, these in the story they use specific phrases and specific speech that then sort of like remembers the person into that body, and then maybe they will take or they won't take. And if they don't take, they have to try again and reinstantiate them until they take. And it's funny, like the one reinstantiating them is with them the whole time. Like he's participating as like a guide, a friend with them in this life situation until they manage to instantiate them back. It's like they're holding the memory of this person in them until they can, torch it back into the thing that's been grown for them to come alive back into. And it's so hilarious, but they do it. And then once they say the phrase and the gola sort of remembers in the right way, properly, what that phrase relates to in the life of this being, then that gola stops being a gola and becomes the person. And then all of a sudden they're acting in a way that they know where they are. They remember, they recognize the environment, and they now know exactly how to participate. And then they start participating as expected. They dramatize that for the character of who is played by Jason Momoa. I think it's called Duncan something. Duncan Idaho. And then they bring him back again and again and again. But the process of bringing him back is very rigorous. But when you read through it, there's like a whole thing being done with memory. And like you're saying, Daniel, it's like, yeah, we like to codify it in the past, because I think it's sort of just it's sort of the shape of how we relate to the experience of time. We want to stand here and then look back where we think it happened, and then we look to where it's gonna happen, and it's just our way of orienting. It's not exactly in that sense. It's more like from how we are sensing into it, and I guess that's how we end up trapped by, always storing it, connotating it with a past quality to it, and then we get trapped in that, and we forget, the ways in which we're always practicing and participating in memory. I mean, like you take the example of home. It's like, why is the concept of home so important for us humans? Like you see, if you see someone and they're home, they're working so hard to make it static. Like they're trying to remove all the dynamism around this thing they call home. They want it to remain the same. They want to know where everything is and whether it's organized or disorganized. Even if they try to reorganize it into an organized state, it always goes back to what you may call disorganized, but it's kind of like its default state. And there's this practice of always kind of like participating with the home to put it back in shape, in the right shape, so it can then, so we can then relate to it the way we need to. Sort of, I use the metaphor of like we're trying to wear our home. It's like when it's in the right state, we can stumble around it with our eyes closed and we will know where everything is and we know exactly how to participate in each thing. It's like, you know, for you, Daniel, like you have young kids, it's like you will know where the toys are always left and you will know how to step over them, whether there's light or not. Like you just, your foot knows. Your foot and the toy have this weird relationship, and the shared memory of you stumbling on it and the time you missed. And now they avoid each other because there was an agony that was produced. And so it kind of like just keeps going on. Like, you know, like you see the road has the memory of you, how you use it. And we try and codify it with all the lines and the symbols and you're driving through it, you know, thinking about something else, but the road knows you, you know it, and you're participating in the memory of each other. It's very spiritual. It's like we're always in this, you know, big spiritual party going on, and we're trying to get to the next, you know, to the next level and do it again and again. It's just weird and fantastic at the same time. I'll just leave it at that. I hope I haven't distracted you too much. But all of this was coming at me, Cleo. Thank you so much.
100% agree. I'll throw it to Jockin, and I may or may not have learned the art of avoiding Legos after the incredible pain that stepping on Legos can bring the human body. I don't know if there's any acne like that. Thank you for everything you shared there, and on the Doom example. As you're speaking, like the more like we are seemingly thinking of our relation to memory as a question of our relation to the past, when really it's our relation to eternity. Like our relation to memory is our relation to eternity. And eternity includes past, present, and future all at the same time, right? Not sequentially, but together, right? And so how you relate, and the reason why I think this is important is because, and obviously too, what I'm saying about not really ever planning to write a paper and it just kind of appears is the coming before the eyes that Mr. Jockin is saying. Like your primary, there's something about the coming before the eyes, memory, spirit, surprise, all of these things come together. And to me, if our relation to memory is our relation to eternity, quote unquote, which is this creative unfolding of ourselves and all things, then the question of memory, like you were making this very important point on grief, Cleo, like that keeps people from memory. So there's two ways, well, if we think of it this, if we think of memory as past, then the question of grief is, do I want to remember these things I grieved, right? That's the question of good memory or not, right? But if we think about memory as eternity, then the memory of grief is perhaps instead not a choice of how I will respond to this, and the question of does this mean you shouldn't have loved? Like it presents a hermeneutic question to you. And if you say, no, I'm still glad I loved, well, then you've answered the challenge of eternity, and therefore eternity can open up to you. Like if we think about grief as simply a question of, are we going to remember the bad things, as opposed to a certain challenge to us or a certain question to us, which then has a certain shaping of how eternity unfolds, then that perhaps reorients our relation. Because I think, like, when you go, well, grief holds me back from the fullness of memory because I don't want to recall the bad things, which in one way is not bad that you don't want to recall the bad things. But it becomes bad if you then become fearful of relationships that bring the possibility of grief, right? And so the proper response to memory as eternity is to choose to not let the memories that you experience as grief lead you to making the choice to avoid relationships. Instead, what it does is increases the courage of new relationships you enter into, which could actually make those relationships perhaps have a, dare I say, higher beauty and higher potentiality than they otherwise would have had there not been courage earned through facing grief that was necessary for the choosing of those relationships. Of which then that creative possibility on new relationships is there because of the past relationships of which led to grief that means it's all an eternal character that determines the qualities of everything that is present now and how your future can unfold, right? So the memory then is not simply in the past, it is having a direct influence, it's having a direct impact on the meaning of what you enter into now. Because grief, like you're saying, suffering grief can make future relationships and friendships harder to do because of the pain you felt. And because they're harder to do, they can actually have a greater meaning or require greater virtue of you, right? Of which then if it requires greater virtue of you, since memory is a reward of virtue, of this quality, then you get more of those voices during the sermon that pops out at you. You get more of that thing that appears to you at the right time. You get more of this feeling of being chosen versus choice. And that is because of memory as eternity, not merely a recalling of the past. And all of this is a creative working of creativity, virtue, time, all together in you that you don't have complete control over. And that's why it's the possibility of freedom, not merely choice. There's more to be said, but I will throw it to Mr. Jockin and then Michael, and if anyone has anything else to say on this fine evening. Jockin.
I mean, first thing, the note about virtue as reward, memory is the reward of virtue. Aristotle would agree. I think Aristotle very much agree with that. I say this because there's a line in Eunoia ethics that the punishment, basically the viceful, they never want to be alone because all they can do is remember all their basically horrible memories. So I think that's actually right on the money. And actually, one of the notes of what is the theoretic space, basically theoria of the beatific vision. I'm kind of summarizing that a little bit, but basically Aristotle's point is you have memory of recollection, right? Memory of the virtue you encountered in the past. So I think this is a very fair point that the reward of virtue is memory because you get beautiful things to witness. And I say that actually in combination with Chloe's now clarification about what was the betrayal. I think that actually the pain is on multiple grounds, I think. I think one of them especially is the witnessing of people who you deeply care about choosing a good that is misordered, meaning they chose the good of money, right, over what the relationship was hopefully to be about. There's particularities about that, but I think in general, yes, I think the question when people are in great pain of grief, a lot of I don't want to feel the pain. I think about that sometimes. I've noticed that is that at the real question mark of what is our object of love, what is the thing we are going to honor hold on with the most pressing of points is, do I want to feel pain? Do I don't want the pain to go away, or is there something worth holding on to? And I say that because when people get wounded in the heart by a betrayal, it is the moment of the crisis, the turning point of your life, your kairos of your existence is in those moments. It decides everything. It always can return. You can always get re-encounters, but those encounters really do decide a lot because that's the thing. It's very easy in real rationality. Oh, it's rational. Shut it off. And this is also the logic of autonomous rationality in the algorithmic space. No, silo, isolate. It's better to be alone so you don't hurt each other than deal with the explosion of the betrayal of when competing goods compete with each other and there's a destruction, right, of the relationship because of that. I think I really do agree with this point that, yeah, And I do see these are, and it's perfectly, that's the thing. It's a rational good to not feel pain. You see, this is the issue. Pain and pleasure being your measure of how you decide your life will end up in disaster because these are in-depth, these are noisy signals, to kind of use a little metaphor language here. It's a noisy, the noise to signal ratio is a lot of noise, quite frankly, because multiple things you can get pleasure from bad things as much as good things, right? And those kind of things. Let me see another note, by the way, is that, see, this is what we're talking here about, this kind of rather provocative claim that spirit is memory or memory is spirit. You know, Daniel, kind of pussy, you're kind of oscillating, you're kind of like, I think it's something like that, but maybe it's all, you know, I want to go a little harder on that and say, I think it is that. And I'll tell you why. Because in Aristotle and in scholastic tradition, we got a problem that never really had an answer, which is, how do the phantasms relate to the eidos? Like the form, the actual forms of things, versus the base of the virtuality. Now, one of the answers was the virtuality. That was one of the answers to kind of address that point. I've had mixed feelings about that for various reasons. I think spirit does fulfill that immensely better, and I'll tell you why. Because there's multiple kinds of form, right? There's basically there's schema, there's morphe, eidos, paradigma, and there are different qualities of things that have that. And what is the thing that can connect all these disparate, apparently, differences between them? I do think spirit is that, because Aristotle has an account of spirit. He does. It's just never been talked about. It's usually dismissed very rapidly because it's used to say, well, when the sperm acts on the mensal blood of the woman, the spirit is actually passing through the sperm, and that's what generates basically the sensitive soul, right? The nutritious soul, and then basically everything from that sensitive soul. So it gets dismissed because it's basically bad, bad. I forgot what science I would be even cold under, but anyways, the point is it's usually dismissed. But I think because in my interest of the heart, as of both the heart and the liver, basically these bodily components of operations of thought for the man, I think these are really important factors, because how is it possible that the virtuality of perception of things that becomes perceived into our minds and operate with knowledge, we can build realities from, like, what is doing this? It just, to call this virtuality, I'm not really satisfied about, because it just seems the degree of accidentalness about this just seems a little weird about it. And especially I think it's almost like how mathematical object is. That's the whole thing too. Let's get beyond even that. The fact that the unreasonableness of mathematics to explain natural phenomenon, right? It's like, what is this connection between them that justify, how can the mathematical symbolic representations actually map on to physical reality? But it's no different than syllogisms. How can syllogistic forms have reality connection to it? Like that, the syllogistic form has an operation of truth, a truth value that connects to reality. What is that connection? This is one of the great mysteries of the scholastic and ancient Greek thought. What is that connection? So to thread this all together is to say, so if the body isn't sold, that's an argument from Aristotle. And bodies, basically, one can make we do know the bodies are accumulations of memory, muscle memory, right? Rings of forest rings. The body is an accumulation of memory coming and going through the space, especially when it's under this model of an informed matter, right? Because the point is that you as Aristotle's point about the hand, for example, the hand has to be connected to the soul. If it's not connected, if it's cut off, there's no hand anymore, only by name. It loses its existence, even though matter passes through it, basically. Literally, it's like this language of a space passing through. It's really the best way we can talk about what form is. And this, so that's the kind, and you talk about this in my health course, is that there's even the idea of what is a substance when there's change and development over time. Meaning the human being as man is not the same as the fetus, as it is as an infant, as it is in a man, grown adult, versus as you're passing away. This is not the same thing. The body parts grow and develop, some come into being, especially when, again, even on Aristotelian accounts, you don't have logos in the beginning. You're without logos as a child. You get logos. So what's up with that? Something that's absent becomes present. Where is that coming from? Basically, this is all me just kind of spinning around again, these kind of stances of potentiality in the form. Where is this coming from? I think spirit is the groundingness in memory. Memories are a kind of empirical demonstration or kind of experiential demonstration of spirit. Cutting through all accounts, I think that's basically my kind of shtick or kind of read on this. And I think I'll leave it at, I think I'll leave it with that, because I think the kind of big question of how to connect ancient thought with contemporary times, I think one of the heuristics we can use is this point of memory, that even the most materiality of muscle memory, that literally, because you remember, and that's the thing too, memory comes from, and Aristotle's point about this, memory comes from a pathos onto the body. That's how memory comes to be. By the way, I didn't talk this before. I forgot this note. One of the, again, I'll be talking about this in my class about the anima. Active nous, we don't remember it because it's never affected. But active nous is actually what causes all these other things to occur in the first place. But it's never remembered because it's never been affected. But yet it's actually the cause of everything that comes to be, an activity of nous. So I find that very surprising. That's the thing we don't remember, right? Because I'm bringing up that, saying that the memory of, like, remember where the Legos are. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like your bodily memory of, in a situational space, your body just knows where everything is. I find that, and the very fact that most of the anima is actually trying to thread the loop between perception, sensation, and knowledge. That's also very interesting. What's going on there in terms of, like, what's happening in that operation, by the way, in terms of what the project of what anima is trying to deal with what soul is. Soul is this meaning space of sensation and knowledge coming together. And I think, again, memory with spirit is actually probably, I think, I would put it down. I put it down. I think it's a first point of, I think some very interesting intellectual projects get generated from that. It's the most obvious. It's something we know, and that's the thing I'm getting is that it's not past based. This idea of memory is presence. And actually, I want to go even a little harder when this note about development. The concept of development having any intelligibility means it's also feature based. It's not just past, and it's not even just present. It's future based too. Because how do we, if the intelligibility of the form of eidos, of man or animal or anything else, is it an developmental schema? I called it encantos. I borrowed it from Aristotle. Encantos development over time. This also means this is embedded in future too. Thus, this idea of eternity is absolutely, I think, right on the money. And I do think it's your idea of the question of virtue and beauty is the encounter of the eternity. The price of vice, the price of sin, the price of damnation is cutting off from eternity. And I think that's actually a very succinct point. And then every moment of choice of the moral subject, kind of entering into these spaces of real, when there's perfectly reasonable points to shut off, to current. Remember, the whole point of sin is turning away from God, which is not turning away from eternity. So thus kind of the point is, like, what are we remembering? Who's calling for us? What is the call from? So I would kind of close this thread. It's kind of interesting that we talk about, oh, memory's not commanded. Memory commands us in one sense, in this way that it calls to us something as a space if we prepare ourselves for, and how we respond to it decides a lot of consequences from that. I'll stop with that.
No, magnificent. I'll throw it to Michael here, and if anyone has any final things to say. If time space is more real than space time and memory is spirit, then memory as spirit is most fundamental reality, because memory is the kind of temporality that is realized in the subject that is participating in time space, which time is more real than space, right? So if we have a kind of metaphysic of time space, and memory is spirit, and memory is eternity, it is actually the full participation in actual being, and memory is spirit, then spirit is time space, and thus is actual. And so, I mean, look, we do, if we have these kind of ancient associations of spirit with memory, does spirit go on after death? Does memory go on after death? Yeah, people remember you after death, right? We also have these ideas, like I said, we can't locate the memory into spirit. All of these things go together. Obviously, in Hegel's Spirit Geist, there's this German association of spirit that is going on, that is something we put together with thought. I think there's other things as well. Like, if memory is spirit, then we're constantly when we bring what we experience into memory, we're bringing the physical into spirit. You're bringing the world into spirit, right? And so then this idea of humans as kind of redeeming creation or bringing creation into spirit, that's sort of, you can sort of see that going on. I think also on this notion of kind of on the active nous that makes everything possible, but that we don't remember. likewise, because the moment we don't ever experience the activity twice, like it's always something that's gone, because once it has happened, you don't have an active nous about an active nous. Therefore, you forget the activity because you can't experience the activity. You can only recollect the activity, which is inactive, right? So that's the problem. You can never repeat an action in this sense, right? Like an action, the recollection of an action is never an action in of itself. And that creates a concealment that is occurring. That makes it very difficult to kind of keep your finger on this prime activity that is occurring. I think also too, like Clayton has been saying on this idea of the body, where you are a steward of the body. And so if you don't have good hygiene, if you're not taking care of your body, then that's one level of the stack that can translate into mental illness. Like you literally have to steward every single part of your body, right? Well, there's a way in which we are stewarding spirit in that sense. Because this is the thing that I play with in belonging, because this is where the question of thought to me is so fascinating, because we've talked about for the last, and then I'll throw it to Mike, this notion of, it seems as, I don't want to say spirit needs us, but there's some interesting symbiotic relationship going on. And the reason I say this is because thought is in the business of overcoming determination. It wants to be a dream. It wants to free itself from that of which it doesn't control. It wants to have, that's the dream of AI, to make everything fungible. Like we've been saying, thought as abstraction becomes fungibility in capital that then realizes itself as AI. So like thought is toward autonomous rationality, right? But thought, because I'm basically saying thought, memory, creativity, dreams are all the same. It's the all spirit, we would say, right? So spirit seems toward dream equality, which is our self-effacement. That seems to be occurring. But spirit is also eternity, right? It is also toward this cultivation of beauty, right? It's as if we have some sort of role, to speak very vaguely, it is as if we have some sort of role to make sure that spirit is actually constantly being realized in relationship. Like that it is actually being brought into relationship, that it doesn't pull itself into abstraction. And maybe that is where memory is no longer that of which is leading to something being chosen. It's just this self-movement that then leaves everything behind. There's something here with the relation of the human and memory, dream equality, fungibility, because what ends up, I guess this is why grief and things are very important, because we want to actually, there's a temptation to not let memory have reality. There's a temptation to keep memory abstract and not real. Like we don't want it to have we don't want it to bring to bear on our lives. And that's why when you have these kind of experience of bad memories, there's a temptation of that to then control memory. Because it's like, I only want to remember on my terms, right? As opposed to when you have a bad memory, instead of looking at that as a choice to remember the past or not, you look at it instead as some sort of poke of eternity, some sort of call of eternity, some sort of choice of how you're going to relate to eternity. When you have a bad memory, you instead say, I'm not that anymore, or I'm not going to overly identify with that anymore, or I'm not going to be controlled by that anymore. And so you don't control the memory. You still let it choose you, but it flows over you, and you shape yourself, you react to it, and therefore memory continues to be the thing that's doing the primary choosing. And it seems as if you don't do that, if you give into the temptation to control memory, then memory will lead you on as thought into autonomous rationality that leads to fungibility and dream equality, as we talked about last week, which is basically the self-effacement of the human subject, right? Like the subject precisely saves themselves from this self-effacement, Mr. Rivera, good to see you, sir, from this effacement, precisely by allowing by allowing memory to be in control of itself and letting it decide what we are going to face and respond to, as opposed to putting it on a lease. That has to be expanded on, but to me, that's on the notion of memory equals spirit, which would make sense if time space is most fundamental, because spirit in this sense would be most actual. We then have to articulate, though, the sort of tragedy, the sort of drama of thought into itself that tends to head toward an abstract fungibility that leads to the self-effacement of the human subject, and the loss of difference, the loss of pluralism, surprise, etc., so forth. There is some sort of drama that is playing out in thought to itself through the human. And the question is why? And perhaps it has something to do with how we respond to those moments when memory appears to us in a manner we do not like. And perhaps thinking about memory as eternity would help us respond more properly. But I'll pause and throw it to Michael here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think there's a million things every day that trigger memories for us, right? Like there's, the example that I've seen in, psychology spaces to illustrate this. It's like you think you've gotten over your girlfriend, like you've processed that grief, and then you're driving down the street and you see the same car that, she drove, and then just all these, it's like literally infinite amount of memories, right? Flash back, and that can like ruin your day. That can be, incredibly difficult, painful to sit with. And so there's this kind of quality of and I think some people presume that, tying memory to grief, I think some people presume that if a certain memory still has a negative, or not necessarily negative, but just like a intense or powerful emotional effect on you, that you haven't like fully processed it or fully like moved past it, or even sometimes like the presence at all of memory of something that, oh, I should have like, put that in a box and forgotten about it, right? Like I'm over that. I see it a lot in therapeutic spaces where you kind of go through a process of someone, of asking them like, is this a familiar feeling? Like, have you felt this before? And they see the pictures that arise and they're like, oh yeah, I'm 9 years old and I'm in this place, and I can picture it, clear as day. And most of the time there's kind of a shame associated with that. There's like like, I'm an adult. Like, why can't I just why can't I just get over that? Like, why can't I just, not kind of reproduce certain behaviors, thoughts, what have you? And so, yeah, I think there's a lot. I don't know if I have any like good insights or answers, but I think there's a lot there with memory and grief, and especially encountering memories that we don't like or make us feel really uncomfortable. But with this idea of memory not just being something that's stuck in the past, but also informs our present and our future, I think that is the transcendent quality, right? That's like transcendent possibility of memory. It's like you're not just, I think like a secular materialist might say like, oh, you're just a product of your memories, right? Like who you are in your present is just a sum total of all of the things that have happened to you, and right, and so that then kind of becomes the limitation of who you are, and you're kind of doomed to, reproduce your memories. And it's like what we're talking about with like the association between memory and spirit. It's like, well, there's actually a transformative potential in memory. And and memory is not just, oh, I remember what dog I had when I was a kid. It's like the relationship you have to that, and that can change over time. Like I've just noticed that for myself. Like um I when I think of a memory now and I let it sit with me, it becomes so much more vivid than it did when I was a kid. And I've also, like Cleo, thought that I'm someone with a poor memory. And I think part of that is true. Like my sister, it's like it's insane. Like from when she was like, she can, like the other day she remembered like what dress she wore at her fourth birthday party. It's like I don't have that. But the things that I do remember as I've gotten older, instead of just kind of discounting them, I pay attention to them more. And I like notice things, and I notice like smells of a particular memory when maybe I just would have focused on like the visual. And so I think there's also something to the way we relate to memories, not just the mere ability to remember, right? That I think that's where the real like, you know, possibility that going on a walk and having something strike you, that affordance is possible when we kind of let memories marinate. And yeah, just last thing before I pass it back, I think this, because we're talking about time now, but earlier we were talking about space and the importance of finding spaces, right? That allow us to be vessels of beauty, truth, and goodness. And so, yeah, but I actually don't have anything there. I just thought that was interesting that we're talking about both of those, and the kind of primacy of time over space, but how important space is as well in the cultivation of the human.
No, I think that's a brilliant question because it's the way it's about making space for time. So you're making space for time to unfold, but the weird thing is we've made time relative to space, and then there's nothing for space to hold. So of course you have a meaning crisis and nihilism. There's nothing there. So like space is supposed to be personal. Otherwise, who cares? Like space, if lack is nothing, space is nothing. If it's not personal and it's not about relationships, but lack is not nothing, space is not nothing if it is a holder of time. And so these things, like there's all of these, like the closer you get to heaven, the difference between heaven and hell is a nuance. Like that's the issue. Is I think one of the reasons you end up with thought and philosophy and thought is because you find like the best of things and the worst of things are this close. And if you get wrong that little difference, it's difference between heaven and hell, right? The person you love the most can be the person you hate the most, right? Because that's what we see all the time in relationships, right? So the difference between heaven and hell is a nuance. And so again, and I'll throw it to Mr. Jockin and then Mr. Rivera on this evening. There's this thing where it's almost like what I want to say, and I think what you're getting at, that there's something more about the relationship to memories than it is the recalling of memories, right? And of course, if memory is something more that just happens, then really the question is the relation to them, not the recall of them. Like the moment we recall them, there's a sense in which it's no longer what we're talking about. We're talking about this thing that just is there. It just pops, right? And so automatically we're talking about the relation to that thing, which of course has a certain apathetic quality, does it not? Like it's what comes up is not, it's what appears is not the source that makes possible that appearing, and yet it's an emanation of it at the same time. It has all these kind of theological qualities to it, which would make sense if memory is spirit. But basically it almost, I guess what I want to say is like one must never respond to memory in a manner that says go and do your own thing. Is almost what I'm in my mind structuring it. Like you must never respond to memory by saying go and do your own thing, because it will, and then it will be disembodied, and then it will be AI fungibility, and thought will leave us behind. Yeah. So like we, in a sense, are the embodiment of spirit. I almost want to say, like we're the determination of spirit. And we, if memory goes and does its own thing, then we end up disembodied. And if humans are bodies, then if spirit does its own thing, we are left behind and we don't have spirit. Spirit goes on without us. But then the tragedy of that is that then spirit, in a sense, doesn't exist. It's nothing because it has no determination, right? So there's that weird move there. So what it would seem as if the practical move is you never say to spirit, go and do your own thing. Like you never say, and memory is the choice of if you're going to tell spirit to go and do its own thing. And that's damnation at that point, right? Like you always have to relate to it. And the more grief there is, the more difficult it is. The more, hardship there is, the more difficult it is. But that very difficulty actually then is an opportunity for a cultivation of courage and virtue, and thus opening up new horizons of beauty in your future, right? So you, in having the possibility of being of this surprise of memory, can contain within yourself, in this sense, the possibility of the cultivation of virtue that opens up new horizons beyond what you can think in you. Like in this way, you contain everything needed to open up horizons you can't think. And that so you can increase your capacity for the unknown without knowing it, because memory creates the possibility of the cultivation of virtue, which opens up horizons. And that seems like grace. That seems like a spiritual gift. That seems like the work of the Spirit. That seems like something all these religions are talking about with prayer and meditation and going into and isolate. That seems to be something that spiritual practices talk about. I'll pause and talk to Mr. Jockin, Mr. Rivera, and if anyone else in this fine evening. Mr. Jockin.
No, you basically filled everything I was going to say. A lot I was going to say, Daniel. The last thing I was just going to add, I think the Greek for repentance, repenting, metanoia, it definitely should stand out to us in this occasion. What I'm saying is, I think the project of our autonomous rationality is we want to forget. We want to be able to, in the smoothness of perfect of all those logos. Because by the way, I mean, this whole distinction of like rightness and correctness didn't kind of look what that's pointing out to in the Greek tradition is our misunderstanding what justice is. Rightness is justice. So what's just? We've kind of forgotten. We have our understanding. I mean, McIntyre had a very famous. I remember watching a lecture of his where he was getting noticeably upset because everybody was asking these questions about about dignity. This is actually very interesting. McIntyre was not a fan of dignity as a concept. He said, no, this is a modernist stance that is coming up because we've forgotten what justice is. What does it mean to be just? That's what rightness was supposed to be about. And rightness became not just a nature of it's supposed to be ontological, right? But the dream of autonomous rationality is all those logos, like that does not require the human person actually involved. This is why your notes, Daniel, about like turning basically when the human turns away from memory, turns away from spirit. I just want all those logos to tell me what's right, right? So those operational, basically, it's obliterate prudence. Phronesis is gone. Judgment is gone. The human actually having held to a choice gets smoothed out in a way by these operations. And I think the notion of repentance is the metanoia in this case is to see anew, to kind of in those moments, not to do the opposite. It's actually to realize you turned away and to come back. You returned back. It's the return. Sorry, so our language actually of like the algorithmic encyclopedia of exit and return is actually on this exact point. Because I think it's kind of I'm threading some loops here of conversation. Because I think that I'm actually feeling stronger and stronger about this point as I'm chewing on what we're talking about. Because also a big problem is actually one is that because the creators, I'd rather have a smooth memory that removes particularity because those were painful. Right? I want to just wash it out so that I don't feel the pain. Because listen, when someone, I don't want to, let me put it this way. When someone I love dies and I see an image of them, even just the image of them, that instantly throws all this memory in my face. And it's really the grief is the excess of life. Death shows you the excess, and we cannot handle it. We say, I can't get it away from me. You want to turn to, when we talk about the beatific vision and you wanting to turn away from it, it's because, look at this, in death, you actually see the fullness of life in the sense that like you realize by that absence, you're like, oh my God, you get this explode. And it's actually most of the grief is sorrow is the removal of a good from you. And and isn't this interesting that a finite person or a finite thing, basically I will say a person, or even nowadays dog, I think a lot of people have a relation with their pets in a very similar nature. But so I'll try to connect using that. Look at this. This animal dies, goes away, and you get blasted with this excess. What you're grieving is the excess of existence given in front of you. That's the great irony of death in this case. This is why death's a privational stance, because they're actually being shown to you the excess by the removal. It's actually very interesting that way. So I think basically when the very fact that, no, I don't, and actually a lot of times in mourning, actually in some cases, sometimes you do need to remove the reminders because the excess, just getting blasted with this excess. And that's the thing, you cannot handle the excess. You cannot handle it. And you say, no, I don't want this. I don't want to see this in front of me. And that's what abstraction does. See, abstraction removes the totality of the individual, like the excessive totality of the unique individual in front of you gets removed by abstraction. That's what autonomous rationality gives you. And that's so what memory is doing, because by the way, in Aristotelian accounts, what's happening is when you're getting memory, it's because the common sense is the gathering of everything together, of sensation and knowledge all in one moment. And it's all held together. And it's held as a unity that does not, like in accounts can be picked out particularities about it, but it's always there in presence and totality. Kind of how a point is undivided, but yet it can't divide others, right? It's kind of that quality about it. So just chewing on this a little bit more, I think the big question, the moral stakes of the human being is when the excess of existence is given to them, when a betrayal occurs, a death occurs, some good of it, because good existence is good. That's also that's a classical stance. Existence is good, right? So obviously moderns might disagree with that, but that's a classical stance. So when we encounter a betrayal, a privation, a loss of some kind, and we encounter the actual excess of life, a reminder of it, we say, no, I do not want this. This is actually the great challenge and great practice of spiritualities and because in the Islamic tradition is to say, you have to say how great God is and how blessed you are in the loss. We say that all the time. And so in one sense, it looks almost perverse. It's like, when your loved one dies or there's, an kind of hardship and you praise God for it. It's like, what is this? What do you mean? But the wisdom in this is to point out, no, this is actually the encounter of God is in these losses. And let alone the other rhetorical points or there's larger theological points. You don't know the plan of this, But there's also, by the way, another notice, because actually the line we always say whenever someone passes away in Islam is, what goes of God returns to God. That's a reminder that we are God's possession. Like we are in our relationship with God is we're returning back to God. So this loss, this removal is reminding you of that too. Again, these are very, when I'm in so much loss, how can you have this relationship with someone with pain? How can you? And this is again, why is a great question of relationship is this question of in the loss, how would we respond to it? I think a lot of this, it comes down to this, when memory gives you this encounter of the excess and for most people, they cannot handle it and they say, no, the autonomous rationality is the way to go.
Very well said, and I'll throw it to Mr. Rivera here. So if yes to the memory is yes to the excess, in a way, it's a yes to the processing of the excess. And the human is the processing of spirit, because yes to the memory is yes to spirit, and spirit is excess. And so you're saying yes to the processing of the excess, the processing, the bringing it into determination, bringing it into realization. And spirit is infinite, right? And so you could say we are lack, spirit is excess, and memory is the choice of the relation. And then no to the memory is no to the excess, and that's autonomous rationality. So if you say no to memory, you're saying no to spirit, which is no to excess, and so you get autonomous rationality. which is the flattening. And so no to memory, no to excess is AI. And this, of course, makes sense because, AI has a spiritual quality, does it not? It has a transcendent, it has an omnipresence, it has a sort of greater than us. Because in a way it is. It is great. Spirit is greater than us. It's the excess of us, but it is in a way a product of a no to the excess. Because we're saying we don't want the excess. We don't want it. So it says, fine, it leaves us behind. It will let us. That's our freedom. We're free to choose in that, And so instead of choosing the excess, which by definition, you can't choose an excess because it would destroy you. All you can do is choose to the processing of the excess, the process of the excess. And life is that processing, and freedom is found in that processing. But it's hard. But precisely because it's hard, it can cultivate virtue and open up new horizons. So memory can open up new horizons, of which means memory is creative. When you say yes to the excess, because it is spirit, to say no to it for good reason, because it is hard, because of grief, because of mistakes, because of sorrow. There's good reason to say no to the excess. But that very good reason leads to an autonomous rationality that then leaves the human behind. Which is very consequential. I will stop and give it to Mr. Rivera. Mr. Rivera, we've been talking about fun things this evening. I hope you've been doing well, sir.
Yeah, no, I've been doing good. Yeah, glad you guys are talking about memory. Yeah, I mean, Michael's distinction, or Michael bringing up this idea that, because it reminds me of when someone told me, like, isn't the point of going to therapy to just move on? Like you discover what's wrong, and then you just move on. And I said, no, not really. The point is not necessarily to accept and move on. The point is to understand why exactly do you have that specific interpretation. Why is it that interpretation, right? It's like, so when you bring up this horrible memory, right? Why is it framed in the way that you frame it when you remember it? Or how about this? Because the memory itself is not going to give you an interpretation. You will frame it in a certain way. So why do you frame it in a certain way? And so what we risk in this kind of move is either that we choose to become automatons to be determined, right? Memory is just what it is. I mean, people say this all the time, right? How could I see it differently? How is that even possible? Right? It's the absolute pinnacle of determination. Talk about transversing the good, yeah. And actually, this does connect to transversing the good, actually. So what I call determination through what people like to name vulnerability is something that Michael gave an example of, actually, is something called the personal. The personal is precisely when you only give biographical facts about your life. So I can say that my father is dead, and that can be personal. But it's completely different if I say my father's dead and I kind of stumble on my words about how my father has died. That's me being vulnerable. Me being vulnerable has a kind of embodied aspect to me struggling to articulate something, even though it's already a biographical fact, right? So grief actually reveals this kind of non-linear arrival of, it's a perpetual vulnerability, actually. Partly why it's overwhelming is that it has a sort of infinite depth to vulnerability. There's nothing you can do to fully satisfy its vulnerability. So it's exactly what Jockin would say. It's the excess of life And it's this excess of life that precisely makes us vulnerable, but also precisely reveals its infinite possible articulation, which is also, ironically, the source of creativity. The fact that something can be the infinite source of articulation is precisely what you would want as material for creativity. How do I, it's like when you talk about someone that's dead, it's like no poem is good enough. No poem is good enough to talk about it, right? No poem will capture it. So when we compare the personal to the vulnerable, the personal sort of overlooks the lack, already sort of determined by its statements of biographical facts. So when we talk about memory, I look at memory as having either a personal side, right? This ability to strictly recall, restate the story as such as what it already is. It's fully determination. But when you go on the side of the vulnerable memory, which is the subject with memory, then what you have here is really the space of the depravity of the good itself, right? You really feel the lack of the good in this space between a kind of vulnerable memory. And it's only in this space of vulnerable memory that it's possible for beauty to come in and share with you something different. But it precisely reveals this kind of infinite depth to creativity, to interpretation. The other thing that's actually really important to this conversation is guilt. Because I like Jockin bringing up repentance meaning metanoia, changing of one's mind. What's interesting about this is that it's very important that we take responsibility for our enjoyment. Meaning that when someone says, well, it is what it is, they're not taking responsibility for their enjoyment in that. What they're doing is that they are covering over their very unpleasurable enjoyment by saying that they're determined by some other law. But actually, it's only when you take responsibility for this enjoyment, this thing that actually gives you guilt, that repentance is possible, that metanoia is possible. And psychoanalysis reveals this, actually, that guilt is precisely when you are refusing to take responsibility for your enjoyment, actually. So I think that's what's very interesting. And what's very interesting about guilt is that guilt would always frame itself as the one that is determined by something else, right? So it's not in the normative sense of guilt in which we speak, right? As I did something wrong and I must pay for it or something like that. It's a kind of different guilt where the person is not yet seeing how they themselves have framed their own enjoyment by this very act. And I think when we talk about memories that might even be painful, there is a discrepancy here where we might say that the reason why these memories return is precisely because there is a kind of enjoyment that is being repeated. And those memories may be erupting because what it is asking is that you become a subject and you take responsibility for how you frame these interpretations of memories. That's all I gotta say.
Well, I think what you're saying there about the framing, like, it's very interesting because if you say I can't frame it, you're saying you're not involved, and therefore it's just facts. When you say I can frame it, then it's infinitely creative. So isn't it interesting that the moment you are involved in your past, it's future oriented? If you are not involved in your past, there's no future potential. So you being involved in your past turns memory from being overly pass-coded to having an eternal character, which is something that is coming up this evening. And forgive me, my friends, I do hear I will have to go with the children in a minute, but this has been completely delightful. Also to what you're saying, it's very interesting to consider, based on what you're saying, Mr. Rivera, that materialism starts in the memory. How we treat memory has an impact on if metaphysics of materialism and perhaps become tangible to us. And perhaps materialism and hard empiricism doesn't start in science, but in the history books. And that would be interesting to trace, because I'm quite a fan of Hayden White and the suggestion of it has been a very big problem for historians to think that all they do is collect facts when they frame the facts, right? And so that mistake, how we treat our memory, is perhaps colored by how we've come to treat good historical work, what a good historian does, which Hayden White points out is completely wrong. History is always literature. That doesn't mean it's false. Actually, history as literature can be the most true, because actually the way people experienced the past was more like literature than a list of facts, dang it. And so the truth of history is as literature. So, but that's the involvement of the subject. Likewise, there's something about the truth of memory that is like literature. And this perhaps gets at why literature and what Cleo has pointed with poetry and Bloom, these things to be all tied together. So perhaps there's a sense in which materialism starts, and perhaps the atheism, the loss of spirit, starts in our relation to memory. Because once you're saying memory is just the facts, then you're saying there is no spirit. And if memory is spirit, you're saying there is no spirit. You're using spirit to identify itself as not itself. So it dies, of course. It can no longer aid in our development. It can no longer point us, because you've used spirit in a spirit allows us to use it in this sense. Like, that's the grace of spirit. So spirit has allowed us to use it in a manner that suggests there is no spirit. And we, of course, have the choice to do that, because we have the choice to remove freedom. We have the choice to remove freedom. So I think there is absolutely. I also like this notion of a vulnerable memory, because the suggestion of this is that the only way to make memory, because if memory is spirit, there's still the question of, is it spirit to us, or do we experience it as mere recollect, as mere facts, right? So how do we make memory, which is spirit, spirit to us, right? It seems to require vulnerability. And then, of course, what do religions stress? Humility, admitting your shortcomings, repentance, right? All of these, and perhaps this suggests why it is easier for religious people to perhaps not be hard, crude materialists. Because once you are so trained to the forgive me act, or, oh, actually, I enjoy that guilt, oh, I'm actually always involved, then you become skeptical of the subject-object divide, even if you've never articulated it, because you always are aware of your culpability, your responsibility. Which, of course, to the degree you take responsibility is to the degree you develop the ability to respond, right? So then, if we're not taking responsibility, then of course determinism is true, both because we want determinism to be true, because we don't want to have responsible, but then it's a kind of self-enclosure, because then in that very act, you train yourself out of the ability to respond. So then it seems true. I mean, you can't respond. So then if you believe in determinism, it becomes true, because spirit allows that. You're free to do that. Spirit allows you to make the world you want. In this sense, you can create the future. And if you want a future where determinism is true, then it will be, because you will habituate yourself out of the ability to respond. And hell is locked from the inside. But I think what you're saying on memory, and I'll close with this, and again, thank you all for coming this evening, is that when you realize the framing involvement of the memory, then you are involved, and the memory is creative, and therefore it is future. And thus memory unveils itself as this spirit. Because spirit is always, like even in religion, whenever you talk about spirit as a word has always had this past history sound to it, as it has had this animating principle to it, as it has had this energy principle to it, as it has had this trajectory sense to it, as it has had this destiny sense to it. The word spirit has always contained all of those kind of connotations in of itself. And the suggestion is that memory is that for us. And is it not? Is it not? Like, this is seemingly empirical. Is memory not empirically this? and thus there would be reason to conclude that memory is spirit. Thank you, gentlemen.